So let's see. I'm just gonna make sure I've got the forums up over here in case anything interesting pops up there while I'm streaming. All right. Oh, that's in the wrong spot. That load time there is because the 4coder now, as you can kind of see over here, I don't know if you guys could even perceive the fact that there was about a 1 to 2 second load time there. That's because it was loading up all of the 4coder files, because it automatically loads a project in the current directory if it can find one, which is handy. So let's see. Sticky jump. Right. Whoops, didn't mean to do the site build. Shoot, that's what introduces the bug. Okay. Well, that's helpful to know. There we go. Alright, so basically what I need to do today is start implementing all these things that say not implemented. So, how do I init the marker list? Basically the first thing we're going to need is the ability to just parse this entire buffer here. So I might need a scratch partition too for that. Guess I better pull the docs up because I'm already questioning myself here. It's not on there for some reason. It's weird. Well, we can do it this way. PD codes and DV current in with the auto host. Very cool. Alright, let's pull up that. Alright, documentation. Doopy doopy doo. I like how the documentation says coming soon right here, and it's probably said that for like a year. Hi CPP Coder, yeah, kind of a surprise stream today. I hinted that I might do this at the end of yesterday's stream, but I think Miblo and maybe Insofar as, I don't know who was there, but not many people. So yeah. Huh, interesting idea. So, um, I don't know how to pronounce your screen name. Maybe like Douter or something like this, or Deuter, Deutor. I don't know. Those are enough guesses for me. Um, how hard would it be for you to add tooltips displaying custom annotations? For example, and by custom annotations, I assume you mean things from the user. But you go on to explain, so for example, next to your functions declaration definition, you have, and then a little note name message style comment, and you would want that to auto display when you put the cursor above the function name, presumably in other places of the um, project. So if you hover over a function name, it looks up and goes, hey, where's the definition of this? Ah, here it is. Well, here's a message that is written here, and then display the tooltip there, so you can get your sort of your short descriptions of your functions anywhere by hovering. The answer is I'd have to think about it a little bit. There's a couple little problems in there that have to get solved. One, there's no tooltip thing at all right now. One thing I'm planning to do soon is in the next engine it'll support more flexibility with the text that you put on the screen. So tooltips might be something I can just throw in there while I'm doing all that. I think a tooltip thing I would probably just do as a separate little box that you put over whatever instead of trying to fit that into the buffer. That seems like it would be the wrong way to go. For other things, I'm thinking about ways of actually inserting virtual text into the buffer. That's not actually in the buffer, but that gets displayed on the buffer so that you can do things like, put a compiler error right into the code as virtual text or something like that. And for a tooltip, though, I think I would just add that as a separate thing, which wouldn't be too hard to do, to just add a tooltip utility. Let me make a note of that. As far the harder part there is actually not the tooltip part, but the let's see, where can I add this note? Let's just add a little tooltip system. But a tooltip system would be useful for other reasons too, so I'll do that for sure. I think now that you bring it up, I've never actually stopped and thought of it, but that's a perfectly good idea. The harder part is identifying definitions and things. I think the best I could do for that is, once the project stuff is a little smarter, whenever it loads a file, whenever basically you're in a project, it would load a file and parse that file and look for spots where it looks like you've done annotations, and then it would just say, all right, for this particular name, here are all the annotations, right? And it wouldn't be able to necessarily discern oh, you're using this overload, but that's the wrong one for the tooltip. It would just throw all the tooltips together. Because I don't have a full parser yet, and that's a little trickier. As far as jump to definition stuff, that also has the similar problem of I can parse the code somewhat, but I can't really distinguish a declaration from a definition from a call site very well. I've been thinking about how I could maybe get around that, if you can identify roughly oh, this is at the top level scope, right? This is not inside of any scopes. It would then have to know that if you're in a namespace, that doesn't count as a scope for those purposes, which is a little bit interesting and tricky. Same thing with extern C. You'd have to go, oh, this isn't really a scope. But if you could figure out how to tell whether or not you were inside of a function or not, then you could treat the top level names as definitions, basically. Still don't know how to jump to the definition instead of a declaration. But ultimately, I think the correct answer there is to just start doing a full parse, which will come eventually. Because I agree that stuff will be nice to have. So yeah, basically it's going to be a while before very good distinguishing between definitions and declarations and things is possible. But very close approximations can get us 90% of the way there for things like tooltips. For jump to definition, what I do right now is I just list all of the locations of a thing. So instead of go to the definition of this, I can just do, oh, get line x rect. What is that? And then I hit Control Shift T on that word, and it shows me all the places where it appears, and then I can just go, well, that's obviously a colon. Oh, there's a definition, and then you jump to it, right? So that's the closest I can get right now. Yeah, it'd be nice if the compiler was written kind of the way maybe Jive will be, where it's a little bit more um, of an interactive, basically. Um, it it does more. It does more than just compiling, but basically it is the arbiter of how the language works and can tell you what's going on in the code in sort of arbitrary ways. That would be nice. Okay. Anyway, um, what we need to do right now is start looking at how to implement sticky jumps. So I pulled up the documentation. Buffer summary. Right, okay. So I can do something like, you know, what I haven't done that I should do is, okay, good. I forgot to check yesterday before I made a bunch of changes that I was on the right branch, which would have been frustrating. But I guess it wouldn't have been compiling if I was on the wrong branch. Alright, so we need excuse me. Alright, so we need to do a buffer read range. Um, okay. That might not actually be the right way to do this. I'll have to think about it a little bit, but let me go look at the jumping functions real quick. Seek next jump in buffer. See, what I could do is just call this over and over again. Each step it reads a line. See if it can parse a jump location. Yeah, I like that. Okay. I take it back. I don't need any of this. What I need wait a minute. Partition. Is nobody jump in buffer? Seek next jump buffer. Seek next jump in. There it is. Alright, so there's where the temp memory gets used. That's what was concerning me. Yeah, so Team R&B has a great question. Oh, I didn't see your comment, but thanks for stopping by, Doubter. Deuter. Okay, so Team R&B says, have you thought about how when 4coder is released, the community can share plugins, extensions, and their custom code? There's more to it. Let me just scan that. Yeah. A lot of these smaller features could be solved by having people making plugins and language definitions, and then you could either make them 4coder features or support the extensions. Yeah, so actually I've been thinking about that a lot. That's one of the things I haven't really paid attention to in alpha too carefully, but at some point I need to get, like, once I know the basic features that I think need to be there, I'm going to shut down the alpha stage and go into a beta stage. And the first thing I'm going to do in beta stage is revamp the API quite heavily so that it is correct for that purpose. What I mean by that is, like, first of all, I obviously just getting the niceness of the API to a point where there's not like going to be some horrible cruft that was super avoidable just in the API. But the other thing is like the actual structure of the plugin or extensions system. Like right now you have one extension port basically, right? You can you plug all of your extension into one custom layer. And there's some upsides and downsides to that, and there's some upsides and downsides to the plugins approach in general. So the upside to the having the sort of one extension port where you can't plug in multiple additional plugins on top of that, the upside is you don't have like the nasty things you get a lot of times where you have plugin compatibility problems where two plugins can't both exist at the same time because they both need, like, A needs to initialize before B and B needs to initialize before A, right? Or you run into nasty things where the order of initialization has to be controlled, so you have to include the plugins in the right order. So like C depends on A getting done in time and A or beforehand, and A depends on B getting done beforehand. I don't know if I'm keeping the letters correctly, but that kind of thing happens. And then it gets even more nasty when, okay, well, I'm trying to write this plugin, and I want to initialize after B, but I want to get the file hooks before B because I want to do something to jig the files around before B does something with it, but I need to plug into the B plugin's other thing or whatever nonsense, right? So the multiple plugins, like where you just like load another plugin, when they're done cleanly and they don't have any interdependencies, they're great, but because they're all hooking into the same framework, it's very easy to accidentally start getting into the dependency sort of hell type situations. At least that's been my experience with any plugin-based system I've used. So I'm trying to make a system that would avoid that. Having just the one port for plugins means you kind of avoid that in the sense that there can't be conflicts if there's just the one custom piece of code. The downside is then everyone is just got to write their own code, and you provide plugins as basically libraries for that custom code. That doesn't quite seem to work either. So I'm not sure what the exact best thing to do there is. I might have a thing where you have multiple single port, like you have one single port, but you have a meta system kind of in 4coder that lets you switch between them easily. So you can be like, right now I'm in the mode for my editing customization, but then I've got this plugin that lets me do like Git management, and I just hit a button and it unloads my DLL, loads in their DLL, and now that's the one plugin that's active. But that one plugin has all of my, like, I manage all my Git stuff, and then when I'm done, I hit another button and switch back to the editing mode, right? So that's the kind of direction I'm thinking of it going, although I'm open to discussing it a lot because there's a lot of ways you could structure such a system, and I'm trying to maximize the ease with which you can write them correctly without, and as well as the ease with which the user can then reliably get that thing working, right? It's fairly easy when you first write your plugin to be like, no, I got it working, right? You just do the X, Y, and Z to initialize it, and then you plug it in here and there, and it all is great, and I've got it all working. I don't get what the problem is. But then as soon as someone else tries to use it, it's like, oh, I need this other plugin, but then I have to do the more advanced plugin initialization thing to make that work in my custom code, And if I don't, there's no, I guess maybe there's an automatic system that automatically helps you figure that out, but oh, I don't have the thing that runs the automatic system or whatever. Like, it gets bad if that's not handled correctly. So if there's going to be another plugin model other than the one I discussed, someone with an idea of how you set those up correctly would need to maybe give me some pointers or something, because all of my experience with like Wild Wild West style plugins have been bad. By the way, why are these int32s? At some point I added the bool 32 so that I could distinguish between an int and a bool. I didn't realize in how many places I had already used int as my bool type. Anyway, for instance right here. Okay, so the point is I figured out where the temp is. It's here in advanced cursor and jump view, which is calling seek next jump in view. I think I want to call seek next jump in buffer. There we go. ZatZ asks, are you using Vim or Emacs type key bindings, or are you just coming up with your own as you go? I'm mostly coming up with them as I go. I started with an Emacs config, but I had already redone the bindings in the Emacs, so it's kind of Emacs style in a lot of ways. It also is not Emacs style in a lot of ways. Like, I use the standard cut, copy, paste, undo, redo buttons, so Z, X, C, V, Y all do the things you would normally get in Notepad or something. Sort of your standard editing, modern editing paradigm there. Then I have like a mark and cursor like Emacs and so on. So the default bindings are kind of just a made up thing that are the way they are because they match my expectations for myself. They're not really meant to be good because I haven't put the time into designing a good one yet. At some point, though, I'm going to pretty soon actually be able to provide a properly here is the Vim mode and here's the Emacs mode, and just have the default stuff in there. You obviously won't be exactly like working in Vim or Emacs, because you still have to, if you wanted to go do your own key bindings, you'd have to go do them in the 4coder customization system instead of a Vim or Emacs customization system. But it will at some point in the not too distant future actually just have those in, and at some point I'll probably retire my 4coder bindings as they are and design like a properly good one for the default 4coder bindings. So that's the state of the bindings. Alright, connects jump in buffer. Alright, so I've got the next jump spot, which comes back to me as a name-based jump location, right? Yeah, so I've got a name-based jump location. Basically what I then need to do is, if it's the same buffer as the previous buffer, keep using the same handle, and add one more to the count of the handles. Right. Okay, so name-based jump location, right? So the string it returns is on the memory partition. So TeamRB has some interesting thoughts for me to consider, which I haven't totally thought about all of these things, but let's see. Yeah, so there's this tension, I agree, between bloatedness and having lots of features, which you can easily resolve if you say, look, it's a very slim system with customization, and then you can have exactly the features you want by customizing, which I agree with for the most part. It's actually kind of what I'm pushing towards, is slimming out the core now that I've got the basics figured out, and figuring out as much as I can, how do I move things into the custom side? How do I move the definitions for various rules? How do I move the definition of the language parser? Anything I can, how do I put it into the custom side, so we can get more flexibility. Basically, the core provides you with, here's a super fast way to handle buffers and render them, and it does stuff like keeping track of the positions of markers and all these things, undo and stuff like that, right? Things you probably don't want to implement yourself because it's nasty, boring string stuff and sort of memory management optimization kinds of problems. Once that's all in the core, and like multi-threading stuff too, once that's all in the core, then all that's left to do is say, okay, that's all in the core, everything else is in the custom side. Now, how do you structure the custom side so that you leverage it maximally? That's the only question there is, right? There's no, in my mind, no other question except how do you structure the custom side to leverage it maximally. The point I think I'm trying to make is I'm not sure, well, I know the point I'm trying to make. The point that I believe is true that I'm trying to get across is I don't know for sure what the best way to structure that custom layer is. And what you're kind of suggesting is I should maybe start trying to push that customization thing earlier rather than later so that I can see in the wild what happens when people try to use the customization system. Does it really work the way I think it will, where you unload and switch between various modes? Or does it more like, end up devolving to a thing where everyone uses one single layer that does a plugin, implements a plugin framework, and then everyone implements plugins on that API? Which is a good point. I'd like to know. I'm worried because I don't necessarily have a good way that I can think of to test that right now. I mean, for instance, the customization thing exists now, and I've gotten some feedback on like, oh, here's what works in it, here's what doesn't, right? But maybe I should just start doing marketing and trying to get people to experiment with it and see how it works in alpha. But if I'm doing that as an experiment, then there's no way for me to guarantee that I'm not changing the API, and that's the number one thing that prevents most people from diving in and experimenting with it, is because they don't want to spend a lot of time perfectly customizing their editor and sending me feedback on what's missing in the API and what's holding them back and whatnot. Right? Doing all that work for them doesn't make a lot of sense if I haven't locked down an API. But if I have locked down an API, then we're already past the point where I can do any experimentation to figure out what's going on, right? I can't do both. And it doesn't seem like I'm going to get much more feedback than I already have gotten, So I have to predict what I think will work and what won't work, I think, at this point. Unless you have a suggestion. Aragraph asks, Justin, what are we doing today? I am continuing to work on the jump buffer system. So to demonstrate real quick the jump list system, if I build right now, it will give me a list of spots where things don't work. Oh, and I guess I need the app links there. It'll give me a list of spots where things don't work, right? And suppose I add a new line right here while I'm editing that, right? So I put in an app and I'm like, that's on 2 lines. Now let me put a new line there. Now when I jump to not implemented, you can see, it thinks it's jumping me to this not implemented thing here, right? But the spot it's actually jumping me to is 1 line above that. And that's because I've inserted that new line up there, and so all of the lines don't match up with the text on them anymore, right? They're all off by 1. So what I'm doing is I got a new marker system that lets you put markers on a buffer, and then they move around as you edit the text so that they stay where you expect them to be, right? And that's going to be useful for a lot of things, but the first big thing I'm doing to exercise the system is making the jump lists actually use a marker list. So it'll convert the list of jump positions to a list of markers, and then it'll use those markers to actually do the jumps so that it jumps to the right positions always. That's what I'm working on today. Alright, so point is, we can now seek to the next jump in a buffer. There's a couple tricky things here. So seek next jump in buffer allocates a little memory on the partition. That's enough memory to store the name of the file. Then I need to be able to compare that to the previous file name, which means that still needs to be in memory. And then I need to have a growing list of position jump locations, basically, right? So I have a few different arrays that all want to grow simultaneously, basically. I have one thing that kind of wants to act as a ring buffer where I have the current and previous names at any given time, and then the next name comes in and might overwrite the name from 2 spots ago, but not the previous name. So I kind of want to be able to bring things in and cycle old names out. And the memory management stuff I have right now is basically just a stack and a the general memory thing, which does large allocations, but not really small ones like these. So what do I want to do? What's the correct way to handle that? Well, one thing I could do is every buffer name that comes in, I could turn that into a buffer ID. That's what we'll do. So what we'll do is we'll say buffer ID. Oh, no, that's what I'll do. So I'm going to make a list of these locations coming out, and I'm going to put them into a list of ID-based jump locations, right? Okay, I got it. So, here's what we need. Location list equals alright, so what we'll do is we'll temporarily allocate the allocate the space for the current name that we get. Then we're going to convert that to a location or an ID-based location. So let me get an ID-based location. ID location like that. And then what we'll do is if the location count is greater than 0 and location list base location count -1 dot buffer buffer ID does not equal ID location dot buffer ID. Let's do that a little differently. ID based location prev location equals that. If prev location buffer ID does not equal ID location dot buffer ID. There we go. That's a little more readable. Okay, so I saw a question. I'm ready to get to that now. So let's see. ZatZ asks, is syntax highlighting on the list of things to do? Yeah, syntax highlighting, I assume you mean for, well, I don't know how much you know about 4coder actually, so I'll just show this real quick. There is syntax highlighting kind of, in a sense. I'm just not using it. So like if I go to this one for instance, you can see we've got literals, keywords, strings, comments, those kinds of things highlighted. I just am using a theme that doesn't highlight very much stuff. But if you mean for languages other than C and C++, like generic highlighting, where you just sort of give a regular expression list that defines the language and then it does the thing for you. If that's what you're looking for, that's not in there, no, but it is on the to-do list for the 4.1.x series. Basically, I could in theory do that now, but I don't have a very flexible system for things like the basic buffer operations, which are the rendering and the seeking around and stuff like that. They're kind of hard-coded into the C lexer. So what I'm going to do is have basically a regular expression-based lexer that you just define however you want, and then you can just make your Java one or your C# one or your whichever one you want, and it generates the lexer from those regular expressions, and then it can do the highlighting. So hopefully that answers your question, and that'll happen in the next version where I actually have more flexibility. Like in the next version of the engine, not in the next build. Okay, so I get the new location, and if that does not equal the previous location, then I have a situation where I've stored up a couple of IDs, and I'm switching to a different buffer, and I want to basically, well, one thing I should do, ID location, if the buffer exists, buffer ID, right. So if ID location dot buffer ID does not equal 0, then if location count is greater than 0, and then next line. Okay, so there's two things we need to do. Here we need to just output the okay, so we need to set the new location equal to the ID location that we just got, and then technically this should say new ID location, and then we need to increment the count. Now, for in this situation, what we want to do is we've got an array of locations, and we're basically going to take those, convert them into a set of a new marker and a set of a new marker handle, I mean, and a set of markers in that marker handle for the given buffer. That's what we need to do. So, um, um, once it's done, it's going to end the temporary memory, begin a new temporary memory, and continue. So that's just my way of clearing wait, don't I have a thing for that? Yeah, why is that way down there? There we go. That's better. Jesse R. Meyer says, JBlow guessed that an ideal data structure for text storage access was something like flat arrays, one per line of text or something like that. Is this right? What are your thoughts about that? So, yeah, I discussed that with him at one point, not too long ago. And he might be right. I mean, I did a test of about 4 different data structures, and the one I ended up liking was the very basic gap buffer. Just because of the simplicity and because of how well it did with, you know, without having to be very complicated. Like the complexity to payoff ratio there seemed very good, and I probably could have done a little better with one of the other data structures, but it was far more complicated, and I am happy with the choice I made up till now, and actually am still happy with it. But one of the things I didn't try is one array per line of text, which is an interesting thought. There's a couple of advantages to it. So if you do one line of text gets each line of text gets a flat array, the biggest thing you win from that is you can actually change your natural basis of coordinates if you want to. So basically, the natural basis for like a buffer of like just a flat array or a gap buffer, or actually any of the types I tried, except maybe the rope would have had a different natural basis, although I don't know what that would be. But what I mean by natural basis is the natural way you want to index into that particular data structure. And with the one array per line of text, you actually change the natural basis to line number and character number, right? Because the natural way to access that is to know which line you want to access and to know which character you want to access. So that's the only thing I can see as the real advantage, is it lets you do that. The reason I say that is because my particular feeling on it is that it's almost an uninteresting question. It's kind of how you store the text in a buffer seems like the really interesting and obvious thing to optimize, but I don't know, it sort of turns out to be not that big of a deal unless you're trying to do like really, really big files where you probably want to do some kind of out of core thing. Then it starts to become interesting to talk about how do you do that. But like anything that any buffer storage system you come up with basically ends up falling down into the same exact thing. Like, so you take the array of lines of text, or the arrays of line. Each line gets a separate array. The array of pointers to lines, basically, right? I think that might be a little faster than what I've got now, but that's also not the bottleneck I have now, because you still would need all of the metadata on top of the buffer that I need. For instance, even if your natural basis is line numbers and character numbers, you sometimes need to know between these 2 points in the buffer how many characters are there, like how many bytes does it take to store this range. And if those 2 points are on the same line, then that is something you can just answer for free because you just subtract one from the other. But as soon as those 2 points are on two different lines, which happens all the time, you would have to like either start from one point in that range and count all the count the length of each line and add them up, or you need some kind of data structure like the one I have already, right? So a lot of the work, from my point of view, goes into things other than actually how you're literally storing the text. And so although I appreciate that there's probably a faster way than the gap buffer, I find it ultimately uninteresting because it's not where most of the optimization I've had to do even went. Now, if you did say something along the lines of, there are other philosophies you could go with completely, where you say like, well, we're not going to do the coordinate-based thing that Alan's doing. You just always have to have your coordinates in lines and columns. If you want to know how many bytes there are between two positions, you just do the counting, and you always do the slower thing on the lookup, and you minimize how many lookups you have to do by doing other stuff. That might end up being interesting. I don't know. It's just, in my mind, for me, and sort of in the structure of the way everything has worked out in 4coder, it makes sense to say that you convert between different coordinates, basically, within the buffer. So you have line and character on the line is often useful, but it's also very often useful to know the exact absolute index into the buffer. And whichever way your natural basis is, you still need the same data structure to convert back and forth. Enemy Mouse asks, what are your plans for extending the treatment of comments to preserve existing leading white space? Honestly, I'm still a little confused about what to do with the white space situation on comments, because the whole point of virtual white space is to remove leading white space. And it solves many, many problems, but it does trash your comments, and I haven't figured out what to do about that exactly. There's basically two possibilities. One is that you just hack the virtual whitespace system and you don't use virtual whitespace within certain constructs like a comment, and so the whitespace just remains as whitespace, or something like this. That would slightly complicate like the translation stage of the thing the new engine, because basically the way the new engine will work is it has various stages of processing, and then the customization comes in between those stages so that it's more structured. The customization isn't like interleaved with the pre-built stuff, but it's like more like, oh, we do some pre-built stuff that everyone needs, you customize a little bit, then you run the next thing, and so on, right? So you have like kind of like a pipeline. And white space, the problem that I have, and this is very abstract since nobody but me really knows how this new engine's going to work. Like, it's all in my head right now. But or it's I haven't talked about it at all. So I have another point from Enemy Mouse here on the chat, but let me finish my thought there first. So I can't do the translation, like the translation comes before I know where comments are, so it's hard to figure out, and virtual whitespace happens by just translating leading whitespace characters out of the stream. So I could either reimagine how I do that and put the leading whitespace translation at a separate stage after you've identified comments, or I just say that we have some way to backpatch that, like you have some way to hack backwards and go, look, we translated this into this, but this is a comment, so undo that. Like, go back and get me the stream of, translated characters I would have gotten. Now, the other option, and this is a possibility, is that I actually abandon virtual whitespace and instead make something like a code layout system. Um, I do more work on the actual text layout thing, and I allow the text layout thing to do line wrapping and line unwrapping and all that kind of stuff. And it has the one disadvantage that it would mean like rewriting the buffer whenever you like insert. Yeah, it's a bit confusing. So let me see what suggestion you've got here. I'd like for the correct indent to be added, but the original space kept raw. Both virtual whitespace indent and original, in other words. So that's something I've thought about. So what you're saying is something like, if we turn virtual whitespace off for a moment, and so we got like spaces here, right? So this is the way my comment is spaced, right? Now if I turn virtual whitespace on, that gets disappeared. If I turn it off, there it is. Are you saying that what you want is for it to look like this, but this to all be treated the same way that it gets treated like right here in virtual whitespace, so that basically the virtual whitespace system says there is no space characters there, but I do look and read at how long the whitespace is and use how long the whitespace is to indent the comments. Is that what you're saying? Because that's an option, and that's something I've thought about a lot, but I haven't, sat down and tried it. If that's what you're saying, that's probably the first thing I will try. Then the only other question becomes, I guess you don't clear, like, somehow the auto indenter has to know when it's appropriate to actually. Yeah, that already works. Actually, that might be what I do, now that I think about it a little more carefully. Hopefully that's what you were saying, because I'm going to try it in the 4.1.x stuff. I mean, if you, by the way, Smackhosh Gamer, I'll answer your question real quick. I'm working on a jump to error feature, basically. Let me run the build real quick. Alright, so that lets me jump around, right? And I can see I got a lot of compilation errors right now that I got to deal with. Oh, I don't have U32, duh. But the point is, say I insert a line there, and then I start jumping to location, well, the line numbers are all off now. So like, here it thinks it's taking me to the not implemented spot. It's not actually taking me there because I've inserted a line, and the not implemented is in a different line now. So I'm making a thing that puts markers on all the jump locations and jumps to them correctly, basically. That's the goal for the day. So getting back to enemy mouse, I mean, if you block comment inside that enum, the whole block indents to that level, but you still keep your spaces too. I'm not sure what you mean. What do you mean by keep your spaces? Like if you come in here and you do this, this is the result you get. Actually, let me make sure my virtual whitespace is. Okay, so this is with virtual whitespace off. Turn it on. Like that's what already happens. Is that what you're talking about, or? So let me show whitespace here. So virtual whitespace off, virtual whitespace, or on and now off, right? Here's with it off, here's with it on. Are you saying that you think that the hello should stay in the same spot when I switch back and forth? Good luck to you, Smackosh Gamer. Alright, so let's see. Where is the jumping thing? Okay, so I get the revocation. I need, Okay, cool. So we're on the same page then. You're basically saying do what the virtual white space system does, but use the space that actually exists to guide where you put the word, basically, right? Now the only problem with that, I'll show you the problem with that since we're talking about it. Suppose I go in here and I make a block comment and I put in hello and turn off virtual white space. Okay, so when I'm not in virtual white space, that works just fine because I can do things like backspace and inserting spaces, right? If I turn virtual white space off, then there's no problem. If I insert a white space, if I insert a space character, then it would just, it wouldn't show you that there are more spaces, but it would move hello as you insert it. Yeah, Enemy Mouse, I know. I actually messed up some of my own code examples in my comments because of this system. It's definitely something I've been thinking about how to fix. So, right, that's broken. Now the problem is if I have virtual white space on, a single backspace kills the whole chunk, and I haven't figured out what to do about that part yet. And like I said, one possibility is that in a comment, it just it undoes the translation and puts in all the spaces. That would have the advantage of it just works like you would expect, and it has the disadvantage of it's a little bit inconsistent with how everything else works. And then like spaces versus tabs exists again, which is I'm not happy about. The other option is maybe there's a special key, right? Maybe there's a special key that lets you do like inserting and deleting spaces at the beginning of a line in a comment or something. I don't know. I'll have to experiment with that a little bit. Alright, so we've got the jumping, and what we need to do is well, that's not, okay, so it's not so much a problem that the left margin is always 0, because that's actually what the indentation system is, right? Imagine like virtual white space on, it's treating as if there's no characters there, so if the margin was always 0, it would just go right there. Right, it'd always go to this position there, but it doesn't because I can insert the correct amount of shift. The problem is how to do that in a comment is unclear because a comment doesn't have code in it, so it can't auto-detect the shift that it's supposed to put in. It has to intuit that from the space that's actually there, which means you have to edit the space that's actually there, which is normally not how virtual whitespace works. So there's kind of a tension there between the way it needs to work and the way it actually works that I haven't figured out how to resolve yet. I'm going to experiment with it more in the 4.1.x stuff because it's going to be more flexible there anyway, so it'll be possible to experiment with it without like breaking all things every time I change one thing, which will be good. Okay, so point is, we've got this array of locations. Let's just change that to location list. There we go. Now what I want to do is I want to be able to does this work exactly? I need to create a marker. I've got a count. I need to create a marker handle. Put it on an array of marker handles. Okay, I see. So let's start with um, there we go. So we get a general memory array of handles. Then what we'll do down here is we'll go look. Nope, not that. List.handle count is handle max. Yeah, so Team R&B says that Sublime Text has virtual white space, basically, but only on line wraps instead of on every line, which is what I've been doing. Um, and so yeah, basically what virtual white space is, at least in my mind, I don't know if this is a term that was in existence elsewhere, but the point of virtual white space was to normalize it so that all lines look the same, right? I was hoping to get to a situation where um, wrapped lines and unwrapped lines all look and behave in basically the same way. Um, and that might have been a bad idea. I'm not sure. There's a couple options, right? Like I said, I could fix the virtual whitespace thing and make it work on comments as well somehow, like find a way to fix the comment situation. I could switch to what you're basically saying, which is that there's not really a virtual whitespace because you don't ever translate away the leading whitespace of the line. You always leave it there, but you can still wrap lines and indent them. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. So lines that are the beginning of a line is never indented at all. You just use the leading whitespace to determine where to position it, and then after a wrap, you can shift it. You never really virtualize the whitespace. The whitespace is still all there, but you do have that chunk where the wrapped line exists and it gets shifted in. Then the other option is to abandon all kinds of virtual whitespace and instead say all lines do behave the same way, but they all behave as if there is whitespace leading the line, and you can delete and insert that whitespace as you want, but there's a thing that kind of automatically lays out your code very aggressively so that you get things like line wrapping and auto indentation for free, basically, like you do in the current system. Um, Basically my main goal is that you never actually have to stop and type. Like, I guess ultimately it doesn't matter that the lines are exactly the same. Maybe I should just abandon that idea. But the more important goal is that, like, if I do this, I want all of the things. I don't really like the fact that it goes past the end of the scope, but I want everything in that scope to shift like that. I don't ever want to have to stop and go, okay, now do the auto indentation. I want the auto indentation to be a free thing that always is happening for me. Furthermore, I want uh, the line wrapping to be the same way, right? That's the number one goal. Second goal was kind of to eliminate the spaces at the beginning of a line thing entirely, so that you don't even literally need the spaces to be in there unless you're trying to view the text in other editors. And so for those purposes, you do have white space there. Right, that was a secondary thing, and I might end up abandoning it if I can't make the comments work. Although the comments and like multi-line string literals are kind of the only problem at this point. So if I can just fix those, it's basically any multi-line token, now that I think about it. Okay, so let's see. We reallocate the array. So now it should be big enough, and then we can just set the handle max to the new handle max. Yeah, so I mean, I think ultimately what's going to happen is like all the multi-line tokens will have special handling, and how they get specially handled is not totally clear to me, but they have to be specially handled somehow, because just what I'm doing now is just basically, give up on the problem rather than actually solve it, which is not good, and there's no way I can possibly solve it correctly without giving them slightly special handling, either in how you edit them or in how you present them, like in how you translate them. So one of those two things has to be reimagined a bit for multi-line tokens, basically. Okay, so I allocate a new chunk of memory for the handles if needed. Then what I'll do is I need to create the new handle. Handles? There ain't no thing called marker handles. There we go. Okay, so what that does is we're building up this list of jump locations, ID-based jump locations in particular. If we ever see that the previous jump location buffer is different from the current one, we then stop and basically create the handle for all the markers that that chunk needs. Alright, so create all those markers. Well, I made the marker handle basically, which means I've got the array of markers allocated and attached to a buffer. What I haven't done yet is actually set them, which I need to do. And how do I do that? I could we're gonna reset the memory in a moment here. I could just push an array onto the partition that gives me space to set all the markers. Set those markers from the locations basically, which we have an array of. And yeah, that seems reasonable, seems possible. Now what we aren't handling right now is what to do when these pushes return 0, which I'll have to think about as well. I'm going to put that off for now. Okay, so handle group starts. I have to keep track of that as well, right? Switching over to an array of structures here. Handle. Weird. Oh, you know what? That's going to cause a problem, what I just did. Darn you, structure of arrays. Okay. Internal static void, what bug are you fixing today? Right now I'm working on the problem where when you jump to a position, so if you do jump to location on like an error list or search list, it jumps to a literal line number and a column number, even if that line has shifted up or down because of edits, right? So I'm basically, on generating those lists, I'm putting a bunch of markers on the correct locations. Those markers then follow the correct locations around, and then when you do the jump, it goes right to the right spot. That's the goal. Alright. Handle starts. Handles back to a structure of arrays, because array of structures is not going to work on the binary search. Whew. So I get the location buffer. If that exists, I go on and make sure we've got space for a new spot in the arrays. Then I get the new handle and I put it on the appropriate buffer that we just got earlier, and then I bloop. Okay, seems good. And temp memory temp. Now here's the question: why am I ending temp memory twice? Right, so I have one temp memory, which is just the, oh, that's nasty, nasty, nasty. Okay, so we need to fix a few things. There's, two different temps here. Which is not good. We have the outer temp is the temp for the whole thing. The inner temp is the temp for the name. And then I need okay. So the next thing that happens, oh shoot, but that doesn't work either. Because I need to be able to push that beforehand. Okay. So that's gotta happen there, so that this works. And then I guess we don't need to end that. Okay, here's what we'll do. There we go. So if we did not close the temp name, then close it here. There we go. Actually, there's a better plan. As soon as we have that, we can close the temp memory. If we find ourselves in a situation where we didn't even manage to do the seek, then we'll close right afterwards anyway. Okay. That's good. So now we're closing the temp name right away as soon as we've either gotten the result or failed to get a result. And here, then we're free to close reset the bigger temp right there, because the temp name is only open for that sort of section right there at the top. One sec. Alright. phone was charging. I had to unplug it. Okay. So, that should reset the memory correctly, and then, the last thing we need to do is we have to, in here, we have, we have to set all the handles, right? So, markers equals push array part marker location count. Unclear. Okay. Alright, so we compute a cursor, and what do we compute it from? We've got this list of locations, so we want location list. And then we can use the location. Oops. No, not seek types. I need jumping. ID based jump location. Okay, well, show me where that's defined. let's set it there, then I shouldn't miss it again. So we get the seek from the location line, location column. Okay, so we get the cursor and its cursor position. And this right here, for anyone who is familiar with my discussion on coordinate stuff, is an example of the coordinate system in action. This compute cursor here, where I'm converting line column numbers into positions by basically saying, alright, here's the seek to this line and this column, give me the cursor at that spot, and then that cursor has its positions in every coordinate system so that you can get whatever type you needed. That's basically the way it goes. Alright, so oh, excuse me. So that makes all the markers. And what we can do is buffer set markers. Handle markers. Oops, and there it is. So that should set all of the new markers we've just created. And let's see. Then we need to set the location count to 0 when we reset the memory. Okay, so that should generate all of the markers that we need, which gets us pretty close to finishing this initialization code, which is really the hardest piece of this system. Alright, so now what? We've set all the markers, we've set all the handles, we've set all the start spots, so I guess we don't have the other array in there, right? There's a third array I need, which is jump line numbers. So for each for each jump position, I need a jump line number, which means I'm going to need like jump max and double jump max, new jump max equals jump max times 2. Jump max equals the new jump max, jump max, UN32, jump line numbers, take it back. I still don't like that plan. What I do like is I like coming down here to where I increment location count and incrementing location index along with it. So if it's good enough to go into one of those, it'll go into the list as well. And then if it turns out you can't jump to somewhere with that thing, you just don't do the jump, right? Wait, that would be a problem. If the number of jumps that I think I have doesn't correspond with the number of things I output, wouldn't that be a problem? So suppose I come along here and that fails. What do I do? Prev location buffer ID. I guess I subtract. Yeah, we gotta deal with that. Okay. So if this here fails for some reason, like it can't find the buffer or whatever. No, wait, no, not there. Location count is greater than 0. Does not equal 0. Then we don't even issue a location for it. Okay, so each location we get, we make sure we can issue a location for it. And so the only locations we emit are real locations. Okay, okay, that works, that works. Wait a minute, why is there a location index? And there should just be a jump count. Actually, that should be prev jump count. Double jump max. And then, this dot jump line numbers. This dot jump count equals next line plus plus list dot jump count. Alright, there we go. So still not done, but I think that does it for the first pass of the initialization code. There's still this question of what to do if the partition ever runs out of memory, which I haven't handled yet. Usually there's some way I can handle that by just sort of dumping the portion that I've got so far and then continuing. Right, like you might imagine that I just go, oh, we're out of memory, well let's just have two handles on the same buffer. It's a little bit inefficient, but whatever. And then, you know, the only way that can happen anyway is that you ran out of like several megabytes of memory on the partition, which means you have a gigantic number of these things. So it's minuscule the number of repeated handles you have on one buffer anyway. See, the other part where things could go wonky is right here, not right there, right here, where we actually are dumping out all the markers. If we didn't make sure there was enough space to dump the markers out, we'll need some kind of plan there. We could just get as many markers as we can and set them incrementally, so that's not a problem. And then finally there's the question of how to do this part correctly. I guess here we just have to make sure that there's always about 4K of memory set aside, so maybe make a separate partition actually that's the first 4K of the real partition that, you know, 4K is long enough for any line. If it's not, then you just skip that line anyway, because it's so crazy long that, you know, jumping to it, you know, if you have such a long line and you see it in the output but you can't jump to it, you'll know where it is, and there's got to be some limitation somewhere usually. There's probably a way you could avoid that if you didn't try to read the whole line but just streamed it in, but I'd have to go in and improve the whole parsing situation, which is not the goal right now. So let's see, that has me at, it's about 2 hours of streaming. I'm going to wrap it up for today because I know some other people are about to start streaming. They're on the little Handmade Network schedule. It says I think Canuckles is streaming in an hour or so, and then there's Handmade Hero. So I'm going to keep working on this, but I think that's about it for my stream this morning. Thanks for everyone who came and checked out what was going on, and I'll see you guys around. Bye-bye.